Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Creative Academy, your go-to source for accountability, coaching, and community for writers. I'm Crystal Stranaghan, and today I'm talking about writing nonfiction and working collaboratively with author Angela Ackerman. Angela, welcome. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you. No, I'm always happy to talk about writing, so it's an honor to be here.
Yay. And we have met over the years in multiple places and incarnations. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about how you came to be a writer and what kind of got you hooked on the writing life in general?
Well, I think my story is probably similar to a lot of writers who write children's fiction, because I write, for fiction, I write kind of middle grade and young adult. And when my kids were little, I would read them stories, and I sort of got it into my head, hey, I think I could do this. I think I could write a story like this, maybe even better than this. And I've always loved storytelling, so I started kind of verbally telling stories to my kids, and then writing it down, and they loved it, and they were always asking me for more, but I hadn't thought of like what would happen in the next chapter yet. So I'd be like, I'll tell you tomorrow, and then I have to go and figure it out, and then so that was kind of how it all started. Yeah, I really love writing. I love, as a kid, I was so comforted by books. I had a little bit of a rough upbringing, and I was bullied and things like that. And so for me, books have always been an escape and always been a way to make me feel like I wasn't alone. And I really wanted to sort of pass that on to other readers, that I wanted my stories to be and my characters to be the things that where they felt comforted and they felt like, maybe they were stronger than they thought they were, things like that. So that's kind of how I started. I quickly realized that I needed help, that, you can only get so far on your own. And so I joined a critique group, and that was transformative for me. Just the process of learning from other writers, getting feedback on your work, learning to have tougher skin when it comes to feedback and things like that. It was just all steps that I really needed to take, so I could kind of get to the next level. And that's where I met Becca Puglisi, my co-author for all the nonfiction books and all the projects that we run. So that's kind of how I started.
Nice. Well, before we jump into I have questions about all the collaborative working and all that kind of stuff, but before we go down that little rabbit hole, tell us a bit more about your kids' books. So are you writing picture books or early reader chapter books or all of the things? Where's all that at?
Well, I started It's really common for a lot of people that are writing for children's fiction. You sort of have to like fool around a little bit and see where your comfort zone is. And I would say that more, my comfort zone is middle grade, and a little bit of young adults. That's kind of where I'm leaning now. I had agents, I've submitted, I've been to acquisitions and all that kind of stuff, but none of my work was picked up. I just couldn't quite get across the finish line. And then once Becca and I started writing all these nonfiction books, the thesaurus books, it just grew so quickly. And, we were having such a hard time trying to manage fiction and nonfiction that at a certain point in time, we just decided, you know what, we're going to put fiction on hold for a bit and do a really good job of what we're trying to do, working with writers to sort of help them, strengthen their craft so that they're getting their books out there, which is immensely satisfying for both Becca and I. It's something that is very, a big part of who we are. We love to help writers. And so it's very satisfying for us to be able to do that through our books and through our sites and things like that. So right now I'm not actively writing fiction. It's something I really want to get back into. It's been a while, so it'll be interesting to see what project I decide to pick up next. I may flirt with a few genres that I haven't done before, just because if you're going to experiment, I mean, why not go out of your comfort zone a little bit and see what you can do. So yeah, that's kind of where things are at with my fiction.
Nice. And you are learning a phenomenal amount, I would imagine, with all of the research you must do for your books and putting them together. I know teaching something is the quickest way to learn it inside and out. So I look forward to seeing where your fiction goes after all of this. I mean, you're spending all of this time and effort and energy skills building and perfecting your craft effectively before you go back into the writing piece. So I personally am very curious to see how you find that process to be different when you go back to the creative after all of this time of really just nailing what you're doing. So
Yeah, it's exciting and scary, because it's exciting because just the reason that you've stated, you know, I know so much more now, and I know, you know, my writing was good before, like it was good enough to get agents, good enough to hit acquisitions, all that kind of stuff. So I know it's there, but yeah, I've learned so much. So it'll be really exciting to see what that looks like on the page. But it's also kind of terrifying because whatever I do here on out, I'm going to be probably judged a little bit because, you know, I'm teaching writers how to write. And so, you know, I think that there's going to be a little bit of critical assessment, which is fine. That's, you know, that's fair play. But yeah, it's a little scary too to think about that aspect of it, but yeah, it'll be exciting.
yeah, for sure. It's that part's terrifying. That doesn't go away. It's just part of the process. And I think makes us extra conscious about doing a really good job wherever we can, and opening people's eyes to the fact that we're all learning, we're all growing. Just because you know something and you can teach something, executing it is still a struggle, and it's still something you have to work hard at. And so,
Yes.
you know, definitely thanks to people for their gentleness in that.
Yeah.
But also thank you to being willing to live publicly. Like it, you know, it takes some extra energy, some extra bravery, I think, to put yourself out in that sphere and help others as a first stop, and really pulling together things like that. So, you know, thank you for being brave on behalf of
Thank you.
all of us who have benefited thoroughly from the stuff you've made.
It's like you say, it's the easiest way to learn, you know, is to teach and to research. And so, and I think too, the other thing that you realize, the stronger your writing craft gets, the more you realize there's just so much more to learn. And we don't ever stop learning. So, you know, even, and I keep that in mind, like you know, every project that I do, I want it to be my best work. That's how I honor my readers, is by trying to do the best I possibly can. But like all of us, you can go and read a book that you wrote years ago and you're like, oh, I wish I could edit it, you know, because we're always learning, we're always growing, and we're adding new tools to our toolkit. And as that happens, you know, our craft is going to evolve too. So it's okay if, you know, like I said, I understand that I'll be judged. It's all good. I'm a work in progress, just like everyone else. So I just love sharing what I learned.
Nice. And speaking of tools, I have some of my very favorite working tools right here.
Oh my goodness.
I have a whole collection, actually. I don't quite have all of them, but my favorite ones that I use in everything, the emotion thesaurus, and I know Eileen uses that one all over the place, tells everybody about it also. The positive trait thesaurus, the negative trait thesaurus, and the emotional wound thesaurus are sort of my go-to staple reference books. So when I'm starting a new story, and there's a lot of them because I write short stories, so I have to do this all the time.
Yeah.
Is I go through, I have an idea of a character, I have to pick out positive traits, negative traits, and an emotional wound for each character, and I make sure that, you know, my vision for them and what happens to them lines up. Because they're in a series, you can see all these little sticky notes with people's names on them. Those are the characters that have that particular wound, because I don't want to default to using the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
So this is my old school documentation system of, okay, this one's already used. When I'm flipping through ideas, it just makes me spread things out. So those have been so helpful. And when we sent out requests for questions to our members, when we said we were going to interview you, we got a whole ton of questions around, you know, where did those come from? How did you start creating those? And can you tell us a bit about the writing process and how that works for those resources?
Yeah, sure. So I have a co-author, Becca Puglisi. We are joined at the hip. I think, you know, the universe brought us together for a very specific reason. And we really, as writers, we think about, where are we struggling? You know, what areas of writing are we really having problems with? And for us, the very first book we wrote was the Emotion Thesaurus. And it was because it grew from a need that we had. We found that when we were writing our stories, our characters were always shrugging and rolling their eyes and frowning. And we were just getting so frustrated because it seemed so stale that our characters were always expressing emotions the same way. And Becca, on her own, had started creating little lists of different emotions. And we decided to just go whole hog on that concept And we started creating lists, everything that we could think of that a character, you know, might do, say, think in a specific situation where they felt a specific emotion. And there's also different levels of every emotion. You know, fear is on a range. You know, it's you're a little bit scared and then you're terrified. And so, you know, we tried to keep that in mind. And sometimes we had to split emotions. So I think there is, you know, like there's worried and anxiety, and there's fear and there's terror, and, you know, so there's different kind of levels. So you can sort of decide, okay, what is it that my character's feeling? And then just read those lists of body language and thought processes that are happening inside the character, and think, just the practice of reading those lists, I find, and from what we've heard from readers, it just prompts ideas. Like, you'll just be going through a list and you're like, oh my gosh, my character is totally thinking about the worst case scenario right now. That's all they can think about. I'm going to use that. And then it's up to the writer to write that in a compelling way. That's why our lists are very bare bones. Like, they're not specifically, you know, tweaked a certain way, because we want to provide like the core beat or the core thought, and then give writers room to take that and write it in a really fresh way that matches their character's personality, how they're going to express emotion, what their emotional range is. Because, you know, even with something like fear, what scares you, it may not scare me, and how you are going to express fear is going to be different for me, depending on whether or not we're really sort of expressive, or if we're very reserved, we're going to react differently. If we're in a crowd of people that we don't know versus family, or by ourselves, all of these things are going to shape how we're going to express any emotion. So we just really want to kind of put all the tools in front of the writer, so they can think about these things, and then they can take those core ideas that we have and transform them into something really unique for that character. So that's where we kind of started with emotion. But from there, it was just thinking about, okay, what else do writers struggle with? And we have a blog. Back then, our blog was called The Bookshelf Muse. And what we always do with all of our thesauruses is we blog about them first. So we will sort of test drive a concept to see what the reaction is with people, and if it's helpful or not. And then down the road, decide if it's going to be turned into a book. And I think the second one that we put on the blog was the setting thesaurus. And that one was incredibly popular too, because, you know, often when our characters are in a setting, we're so focused on what they're seeing, we forget about what they're smelling, you know, what the textures that they're interacting with the setting, what they're hearing, and all of these things draw readers into the story. And then when we wrote the book on that, you know, you talk about learning as you go and learning as you research. Beck and I realized just what an untapped area setting really is, because I think a lot of writers, they have a certain level of description, and they're like, yeah, I do pretty good with description. I think I describe my settings well enough, and the readers feel like they're there. But there's really so many things the setting can do that helps with storytelling. It's kind of mind-blowing. And I know these two books are ones that you don't have, so this is kind of, you know, this is a bit new for you, but we blogged a lot about setting because it is, I think, one of the most underutilized areas of the writer's toolbox. And so, you know, there's so many different things that you can do with the setting. You can create mood with the setting. You can foreshadow. You can steer your plot by having certain things happen within the setting. You can deliver backstory. That one I love, because backstory is so hard to do right without dumping. But if you just add certain things to your setting, you can create this doorway basically to past events in a way that it fits what's happening in the scene right at that moment. So it doesn't feel like you're dumping something in, you're just using something as kind of a gateway to talk about something very briefly and then right back into the story. So you're not disrupting the pacing or anything like that. So anyway, there's so much that you can do with setting. I absolutely love it. And of course, we have a lot of different thesauruses that aren't books. I think we have 15 right now in total. And so some of them go on to become books and some don't. So it just kind of depends on, is the subject matter, you know, enough to do a whole book about it? And, you know, will it be helpful enough to enough people? Because these books take a long time for us to make, just because they are so research heavy. So we really think carefully about next project we're going to take on.
Well, and I did happen to notice, as I was poking around on your site, that there are occupations springing up.
Yes.
So, you know, my little detective senses were thinking, ooh, that's fun. I was pouring through a few of the options and wondering if that one had caught on enough to become a whole book yet, or if it's kind of a new addition to the mix.
Well, we're just exploring that one now, but holy cow, have we ever gotten a lot of requests to turn that one into a book. It's actually a lot more popular than I thought it would be. But again, you know, everybody on one level, you think occupations, okay, well, yeah, okay, well, my character's a teacher, or, you know, my character's a taxi driver, or whatever. You just like, yeah, I kind of know what that looks like. I can write about it. But once you start really thinking about it, you realize, you know, a teacher or a taxi driver or a business tycoon, they have very specific traits that make them good at what they do. They also have certain skills and talents that are going to make them good at what they do. And these are all opportunities to characterize without loading your story with a bunch of detail. If I say to you that my character teaches kindergarten, right away, you're going to start to get an idea of what they're probably like, because that's a profession that draws a very specific type of person. You know, obviously you love children, you're an advocate for kids, you know, you've probably got a gentle personality. So these are sort of ways where we can do more with less. We can lead the reader along into what the characterization looks like with our character without having to write it all out. And when they act a certain way, it matches in their head what they expect for that type of profession. The other interesting thing about occupations is to think about how that might tie into the character's wound. Because, and I know this is a whole nother giant topic on itself, but wounds are painful past events that everyone has experienced. You have wounds, I have wounds, the characters will all have wounds, the readers will have wounds. And based on negative experience that happened to each and every one of us, there's going to be certain things that we avoid in life. There's going to be certain things that we choose not to do because we're worried that we're going to get emotionally hurt again. So when you think about in terms of occupations, wounds can really factor into why that character decided to choose that career. They may have chosen that career to avoid something hurtful, like choose something, maybe they chose to be a taxi driver because, you know, when they're in the taxi, they meet somebody, it's for 10 minutes and then they're gone. There's no worry about getting too close to people. So if a character was maybe really hurt by somebody or betrayed by somebody, that might be a profession where they decide, I like this, no meaningful connections. It's like, hey, here's your spot, there you go, bye. And that's how they interact with people in the world. But like all emotional wounds, if you try to avoid something for too long, it's going to have blowback on your character. And that's something that they'll have to explore throughout the story. It might also be something where they're trying to make up for the past. Maybe you have a character who, I don't know, when they were young, they had a friend drown in a river and they tried to save them, but they couldn't reach them in time. That character might choose to go on to be a doctor because they are so determined to try to make up for that past failing that they feel that they did, that they're determined to save lives as much as they can. And so that's why they choose that profession. So there's a lot of really interesting things where we can take a simple occupation and weave it into the actual fabric of the story itself and make it deeper and more interesting and more meaningful for the reader to read. So that's kind of why I like exploring topics, because like I said, on the surface, it seems like occupations is kind of, you know, vanilla. But when you actually dig into it, there's so many different things you can do.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, and you look at where the characters, wherever they work, then there's all the people that they interact with. There's all the different types of conflict that could happen in those spaces. And that gives the reader ideas, or the writer ideas about, okay, well, maybe these things could happen in my story to make more conflict happen. So there's just so much potential. And that's why we really love creating these kind of books, is because we can explore these micro topics that aren't really micro at all. They're actually very big deals, and help writers figure out how to put it into their story.
Yeah, well, and I think with things like occupations, like when I was in school, you know, we're presented with options like lawyer, teacher, doctor, nurse, whatever. But nobody says, oh, do you want to write storylines for a video game company? Or, you know, you want to be a pickpocket? Or do you want to be a travel blogger? Like, these are not options that were presented.
Yeah.
You know, if I look around at all the people I know, and I, you know, in our close friend group, and I start doing a tally of what those people do, not a one of those was ever going to be on a guidance counselor form. And these are really interesting, cool people doing really neat stuff. But, you know, but we're not living that. And it's a very specific experience. And I think it's so important to have a resource that helps us broaden our horizons a little bit. and to learn
Yeah.
that those people exist. And at that point you can go looking for some to interview, right? Like if you want to dive deeper, then you have a window, you know that there's somebody to ask questions of, because there's stuff that we don't even think is a job. And and I live in a big city in the middle of all the action, and there's still so many types of things we would never come across, never mind thinking of past me who lived in a tiny little town, and there just wasn't a lot of exposure to much of anything. It was all in
Yeah.
your imagination and 100% from books, and there was no internet at that point. So now we have all these doors that are open, but only if we know to go looking for them. So I think
Yeah.
that is such an important function of resources like this, is to spark you to go thinking about things you haven't really thought about before. So I'm curious, in terms of writing with Becca, do you have a process that you use to do that without stepping on each other's toes, or like doubling up on the work in a specific area? How do you structure that so that you get a good product and you have a consistent process and all of that?
It's a great question, because I mean, Becca and I not only write books together, we have a couple different writing businesses together. So it's really important that we work well and we communicate well, because otherwise it would be a train wreck. But luckily with Becca and I is we have strengths that complement each other, which is so helpful. And we also have very similar thoughts and ideas. So those two things together mean that we make an excellent team. So when it comes to writing, typically what we do is first we decide, okay, what is the next book going to be? Or if we're going to explore a new thesaurus on the blog, what is that going to be? What will the scope of it look like? And we'll create a template of the different areas that we want to look at for any specific topic. So like for occupations, there's, what a description of what that occupation is. There's a different kind of education that is involved in obtaining that particular or getting into that field. There's personality traits that that character would have. I'm trying to remember what else we have there. Oh, we have a really interesting one on human needs, which is, I won't get into that too much because again, it's a pretty big topic, but basic human needs it's Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, if anyone's familiar with psychology. And it's an excellent tool for writers, because it's basically, it will help you determine what your character's motivation is. It's wonderful. So we try to look at that occupation through, which basic human needs might drive the character to move forward and get that career. So, is there a void in their life where they don't have love and belonging? Or are they looking for esteem? And that's what's driving them to pick this particular occupation. So, or is it a safety and security thing? And so that's why they picked it. So we look at different things like that. So we decide what is the most important aspect of a topic that we want to explore, that we feel is maximum helpfulness to a writer in order to create these really compelling characters. And after we do that and create a blueprint, we think about all the different, in this case, occupations that we might want to explore. We have a huge list at our site, and people ask us all the time to add to it, which we're happy to do. We can never do them all, because there's, like you say, there's just too many variations. So we try to pick a really good range so that if someone has a career that's similar, they can do research on their own. They can use some of the similar entries, but then they can do a little bit of added research on their own. And that's kind of how we work, is we try to create as much a range as possible. But with books, you're limited by word count. You can only make your books so big. And our books just seem to get bigger, unfortunately.
Yeah, if we look at the spine size on
Yes.
these, you can see the progression as we get big.
Yes, we have a problem.
No, it's not a problem. We are totally fine with longer books.
So once we figure out all the different entries that we want to do, and we have a template for what each entry will look like, we typically split it in half. So Becca will take half of the entries, I'll take half the entries, we write them, and then we swap. And she edits mine, I edit hers, we add things that I haven't thought of that she's thought of, vice versa. And we typically will do that several times, and tweak as we go. And so what that means is by the time we're done, you would never be able to say, oh, well, Angela, you wrote the taxi driver entry, and Becca, you wrote the one on, an ER doctor. You would never be able to tell who wrote which one, because we just integrate our voices so well. And like I said, because we have very similar ideas and we have that template to follow, we know exactly what it is that we're trying to accomplish. It's really easy to sort of mesh everything together, and our language is very consistent. After we've written the entries for a book, then we have to tackle the front matter. And that's all the teaching content that comes before one of our thesauruses, because it's only so helpful if you have these lists. It's much more helpful to understand how you can use this particular topic in your storytelling to maximum effect. So every book that we write always has a good portion of teaching content. And so we will kind of brainstorm, you know, what all we want to cover. And that's kind of me. I tend to, you know, I'm kind of a splatter idea person. Oh, I want to talk about this and this and this and this and these things, and this is really important. And then I kind of shove it all at Becca, who's super organized, and she like makes a cohesive outline for us, which is like, thank goodness. And once we do that and we've kind of settled on what's going where, we'll split it in half. And we have a page count in mind, so that kind of keeps us on task, especially as you noticed, our books are bigger, so we really have to adhere to our page count. I think one reason why readers like our books is because we aren't super verbose. We don't go into like tons and tons and tons of reiterating the same thing, and we don't give a lot of examples and stuff like that. We give you exactly what you need because we're valuing your time. Every writer is busy. Writing time is so small that we want you to be writing as much as possible. So we try to really condense what it is that we share. So again, it's just really helpful. And so we'll each write our half, we'll switch it again. You know, we edit each other's work. We can make sure that our language is consistent throughout. Do that a few more times. And again, you would never be able to tell which section I wrote versus Becca because we're both on the same page. We spent a lot of time learning writing craft the same way. So we do, in some ways, we come at it from different perspectives, but we read a lot of the same writing books. We follow a lot of the same blogs. So we're kind of on the same page as far as our ideas, which is really nice. So that's kind of how we do it. It works really well in our case, just really, really well.
Yeah. So I have two questions for you to follow up from that. One is, I'm curious, what is your background and what is her background in terms of like, what did you train in a different career, or when you say you were educated similarly about writing, what does that mean?
Well, Becca, her previous career was a teacher, which is really helpful because it works into so many different aspects of her part of the job. She's very organized, very on task. She keeps me honest in the sense that, you know, she is very detail oriented. And so a lot of things, like I juggle a lot of different stuff and I lose track of different things. And I always know Becca has it. She's like the net. She catches everything. So that's really, really helpful for her. And then also the teaching component. She's used to teaching. She's very comfortable with it. So she, again, brings that knowledge to the table when we're teaching about a particular topic, whether it's in person or it's through our books or it's on our site. You know, she has a very good eye for what does the audience, in this case writers, really need to know to do a good job with this topic. So she's really good with that. Myself, I'm actually, I was a stay-at-home mom. I did a lot of psychology when I was in school, and I probably would have become a teacher, ironically, before I had kids, and then I decided to be a stay-at-home mom. But I had a really strong psychology background. I took a lot of psychology in college. And again, that was very helpful for me because so many of our books deal with human psychology. And the reason why that's important is we want our characters to be true to life. We want readers to read about characters that seem just like them, that have their same concerns, their same fears, their same desires, their same struggles. And that's the magic. When you can create a character where the reader sees themselves in that character and those experiences, it's because we're drawing from the real world and we're putting it into our characters. That's why all this work, this pre-writing, where we're really brainstorming our characters and we're thinking about those traits and what skills they have and what their occupation is and what their past wound was, all of these things are so important because they really help shape a well-rounded character. So I think for me, like having all that psychology background and just having a really strong interest in psychology, Becca also has a strong interest in psychology. That was kind of magic for us to just sort of be able to put all of that into our books.
Yeah. And that comes through. Like, I'm a health psychologist by background as well. So
Oh,
when I was reading it, that's always one of the first things I look for. I mean, when I'm reading a book, I'm analyzing the psychology of the characters and is it believable and realistic, and do these people have depth and everything else. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I love the resources so much, is it's authentic. The information is accurate. The frameworks that you put in the teaching components at the beginning, it totally lines up. It's legit. It rings true for all of the things. And so, you know, a lot of times I'll get a resource book and I'm not 100% convinced. You know, we can't know all the areas of everything. And so,
well,
you don't always have total buy-in, and it makes me crazy when people repeat stuff over and over and over again. So I love that they're succinct, they're to the point, and they're accurate. And that just makes it such an easy job to be able to trust the materials. So,
well, that's good. That's good. And I hope that they're accessible too, because Becca and we're not psychologists. And I think that's almost works in our favor because we have a strong interest in it, but we don't have that education. So we are able to write about it in a way where it's accessible to the everyday person. Whereas I do notice that some books that are written by psychologists, they use a lot of terminology and they kind of get lost in the weeds a bit in the academics of it. Whereas we just look at it from the standpoint of how does this apply to you as a writer? What do you need to know about this particular aspect of how, you know, why people do the things they do and why they behave in the ways that they behave. So we look at it from that aspect of the writer. What do you need to know versus, you know, trying to get too deep into the actual like inner workings of the human brain and talking about neurons. And like, we don't need to get right. Most writers don't need to know any of that. So there's no point in going that far or that deep.
yeah.
So.
And that actually leads perfectly into the next question that we had that came from a member. And this is a really specific one, but I'm hoping you can maybe give them a bit of advice. Here's the question. I've been told to write in deep POV. I love the emotion thesaurus, but my characters are simple, young, or uneducated and would not know most of these words. What would you suggest I do?
Well, and this is a really common struggle for people who write children's fiction because, you know, there's obviously you're dealing with a different audience, and so things can't be quite as complex as they would be for older audiences. So you can only go so deep. You can only use so much terminology and stuff like that. But the main thing to remember about deep point of view is all about making the reader feel that they are sharing an intimate experience with the main character. So deep point of view isn't so much about terminology or things that someone who's simple what they would or would not know. It's more about communicating their life experience on the page. So what I mean by that is if you had a character who is a farmer in Kansas and you know, they're going to think in terms that apply to their life experience. They're not going to be talking about things that someone who maybe grew up in the city. They're not going to look at things the same way. They're going to describe things when you're in their point of view, you're describing it from their viewpoint. So what they see, what they hear, what they taste, what they touch, all of those things come into it. So you're going to use terminology that's familiar to that character. And this is where you get overlap between deep point of view and voice. Voice is really, really powerful, and deep point of view is one of the great ways to deliver voice. If I'm trying to describe, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a good example. I'll just blurt out whatever comes to mind. But like I said, if I were a very simple farmer in Kansas, I might not describe the sun as like a sparkling jewel from Tiffany's. I'm not going to describe it like that because I've never been to a Tiffany's. I don't know what a Tiffany is. I don't even maybe have a TV set. So I'm never going to write like that. I'm going to do it in terms of something that is accessible to me as a farmer growing up in that rural community. You know, I might compare it to a flower or something that's more aligned with what I see and interact with every day. So that's like a part of what point of view is just not worrying about the terminology and stuff like that, and instead thinking like your character and describing things through their experience. The other thing with deep point of view is to get rid of filtering words. Things where you write, you know, felt, saw, heard, wondered, knew, those are all filter words that creates distance between your character and the reader. If I say, you know, Angela, you know, wondered what the weather was going to be like today, immediately I'm telling you that I'm not Angela. I'm observing Angela, and Angela is wondering what the weather's going to be like today. Instead of just simply writing, you know, I wonder what the weather's going to be like today, or what should I wear today? Am I going to be too cold, you know, if I don't wear a sweater? That's where you go deep point of view. You get rid of the filtering language altogether, and you're just being more direct with the character's thoughts. The other way that you can write deep point of view is always be aware of what your characters experience or feeling at any given time, because it's going to affect everything that they do, everything that they see, and everything that they feel. You can have two people sitting in a park, and one is just sitting there eating their lunch, thinking about stuff that happened at work, stuff that they have to do when they go back to the office. And maybe the other person sitting on the bench just found out that her brother died. Those two people are going to be in very different emotional states. And the things that they're going to notice about the setting around them or not notice because they're so deeply embedded in their grief is going to be a completely different experience. So rather than thinking about, you know, how do I show emotion in terms of the words, think instead of how can you convey that feeling. If I'm in a park and I'm just discovered that my brother has died, you know, what's going to just completely fade out, or what is going to draw my attention? If I have a lot of really great memories of my brother and I playing, you know, as kids, and there happens to be a playground nearby, that might draw my attention as the character. I may be watching those kids and thinking about my brother, you know, and thinking about the things that we used to do. That's deep point of view. That's where you're really pulling readers in so that they're experiencing exactly what the character's experiencing at that time. So these are just a few examples of how to use deep point of view. Do you think that answers the question?
Yeah,
or do you want
I
me
think
to go
that
deeper?
goes a long way to answering that. It just focusing on not using the words always that are in the book, but showing it, right? It's always back to that show, don't tell. So you need to understand the minute differences in how those people are feeling and what those emotions are, so that you can show that in different actions and reactions, and like you said, what they're noticing or not noticing, what kind of thoughts they're having in that moment. And that's all driven by whatever that character's language levels or education background or life experiences or whatever are. So it's always the character in the center and interpreting the world as they would. But you as an author get to use those lists as additional inspiration to spark something appropriate for that character.
Yeah, no, well said, well said. And it really is, it's just about whatever they are experiencing, show it. It's really show, don't tell, you know, and it's coming from inside of them. It's their thoughts, what they notice, what they're concerned about, what they're worried about, what they really want. These are all things that really need to come from within, because as they go through their day, like I said, the things they notice, the things they do, the things they're focused on, worried about, it's all going to be very tied to them personally. Mm-hmm. It's going to have that immediacy. And so you really want to put the reader in their seat so they feel that they're experiencing the same thing as the character at the same time. And getting rid of those filtering language, like that's a big part of it. Just make it more immediate. And there's lots of like blog posts and things like that on point of view, and especially on filtering language. So, you know, a Google search can bring that stuff up too.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Okay, I think we've answered that. Now I have one more last area I'm hoping we can chat about. I couldn't help but notice you wear a lot of different hats in a lot of different places. There's, you know, Angela the writer, Angela the marketer. You're maintaining at least 2, maybe 3 writing businesses / websites / things that I know about, plus managing a family as well and all the other things that go with that. So if we could talk a bit about how you balance those things. So my first question is, what does a day in the life of Angela look like? So do you have a typical day or week, and what's the shape of that? Like, how do you fit all those pieces in?
Well, things are a little bit chaotic right now because I have a dog, a new puppy. And as anyone who's ever had a new puppy, they are so time consuming because you're trying to train them and they constantly want to be played with. And so my typical day right now is all over the place. But before the puppy, I would, you're right, I do have a lot of hats. Becca and I, we divide and conquer with a lot of stuff that we do, which again, it plays to our strengths. I'm very good with marketing. I don't like promotion, I like marketing, because I view marketing as knowing my audience, knowing what they need, and then giving it to them. And so I'm really a facilitator of great content that I've found that I think will help writers. I try to share that. I try to answer questions that people have. I try to direct them to things that are going to help them. And that's kind of my mission with marketing. It's more about that than buy my book or any of that kind of stuff. I also enjoy interacting with people and stuff like that, and just basically helping however I can. And I think that really resonates with people. They know that I'm authentic. It's not just like an act or anything like that. It really is who I am. So I do kind of the marketing end of a lot of stuff, whereas Becca, she manages a lot of the business stuff, which plays to her strengths because she's very organized. She's detail oriented. She's great keeping everything all together and keeping track of the numbers and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of do a divide and conquer. I think that's why I'm able to juggle as much as I do, is because she takes on a lot of the tasks that I'm not suited for, and I take on tasks that she's not suited for. So it really works well. So in my case, I do a lot of social media, probably first thing in the morning. I make sure that I've got content that I want to share on all my social networks. I make sure that I'm answering any questions that are in any of my inboxes, talking to people, posting on their walls and things like that. And then depending on the project that I'm working on, I'll take a few solid hours and dive into that. So typically Becca and I, we are always writing a book, and we always have a new thesaurus that we're exploring on our blog. So we always have 2 different thesauruses going on at any given time. In addition to that, we also have writing software. It's called One Stop for Writers. And we're also always developing that as well. So we kind of have 3 projects that are almost always on the go. So I will just pick one of those, whatever is the most pertinent to get done, that has the tightest timeline, and I'll just work on that for a while. And then periodically I just check in throughout the day, check in online. In the evenings, I do a lot of my research. I will, look for really good articles that I think will help writers. I look for tools. I really love finding new tools and resources. I'm sort of a total nerd in that regard. So I'm always on the hunt for that kind of stuff. And then I share it when I find it. And then whatever topic that I want to learn about as a writer or as a marketer, I'll use that time in the evening to sort of multitask. I'll kind of watch TV with my husband a little bit, or go for a walk and think things over. And then I'll do, kind of flipping through my iPad, researching different things at the same time. So that's kind of my day. And then I just cram stuff in between. My kids are older. I have a 20-year-old and a 22-year-old, and my 20-year-old just moved out. So it's just my 21-year-old at home. And I mean, he's got a full-time job. And so, I don't see him a ton. I see him in the evening. We spend time together in the evening. But because I work from home, I can kind of make each day sort of fit whatever is happening that day and work it around walking the dog and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
cool. So variety of shape. You don't have like a super rigid schedule you follow every day or anything like that?
No. I just more have timelines, like deadlines, and I do a lot of speaking and things like that. So I have to build presentations and, practice presentations and stuff. So it really kind of just depends on what's coming up. Every year, Beck and I, we make a business plan, which is a big part of our success, I think. We do one for ourselves, for one business, and then we do one for One Stop for Writers, our other business. And that always keeps us on track. It always reminds us of what is it that we have to do this quarter? What things did we want to get done in the summer? And if you get too far behind on those things, then you're going to really be, struggling in the fall, because there's more things that need to get done. And then winter, there's more things that need to be done. So it helps keep me on track. And yeah, we really utilize our calendars to kind of see what's coming up and always stay on top of stuff as much as we can. So yeah, it really depends on what's coming up and what the timeline is. So.
Okay. Last question. Well, almost. So if you could give people advice, if there's somebody out there who's thinking about working collaboratively with someone else, what is your one golden nugget of advice that might help them make that a successful experience?
Ooh, one golden nugget. That's put me
Or
on, you
like
know,
2 or 3 if they're short. I don't know.
I
Start with
think,
one.
honestly, I think I would say communication is really important. And I would say that this goes for if you're writing collaboratively with another author, if you're looking for an agent, um, situations with your editor, whatever it is, communication really is key. You have to find people that communicate in the same style, the same way, and have the same sort of regard for it as you do. And respect that, you know, other people may have different processes. So Beck and I, we communicate all the time. We are always emailing each other. She lives in New York, I'm in Calgary. And so we're constantly Skyping each other and stuff like that. Once a week or twice a week, we'll have a Skype where we need to discuss bigger things. But for the most part, it's email. We're always emailing each other about stuff, keeping things on task. If you have a relationship with an agent, you have to make sure that you understand their communication style. You know, my first agent, you know, she was an excellent agent, very, very well known, but unfortunately, you know, communication was kind of bottom of the pile for her. And, you know, I would send an email and I was not a high maintenance kind of client. Like, it was just literally, I needed to know something and I would ask and I would not hear back for like 2 weeks. And then I'd send another email and then, you know, oh yeah, you know, I forgot to do that. Can you send it to me again? And just that kind of stuff. Like, it's just a real time waster. So you have to make sure that you're meshing really well with their communication style. You have to respect other people and their time. You don't want to be like, you know, where is this? Where is this? Where is this? Like, that's not cool, especially with agents and editors. But if it's a writing partner, you guys really have to have strong communication so that you're always on the same page. You understand what the mission is. You know, you have the same sort of vision. Or if you have differing opinions, you challenge each other. Like, that's one of the great things with Becca, is we don't always see eye to eye. And so it forces each one of us to sort of look at things through somebody else's position. And, you know, we're always able to come to agreement, you know, on everything, which is always great. But it's largely because we communicate.
Awesome. And if people are wanting to connect with those helpful things you send out, where should they go to sign up for your newsletter and or stalk you online?
I'm kind of everywhere. We do have a newsletter, and right on our, we have 2 newsletters, one for One Stop for Writers, one for Writers Helping Writers. I'm not a huge sending out a lot of email to people, because again, I try to respect people's inboxes. So feel free to sign up for those, and I definitely recommend signing up for Writers Helping Writers, because every time I do send one out, I always list, it's called Angela Super 6, and there's 6 like really awesome, incredible resources or tools that I've found that writers definitely should check out. You know, and then there's just kind of updates on what we're doing. People always want to know, you know, what's the next thesaurus and that kind of stuff. So those are kind of update emails to kind of let people know where we're at and what we're doing. One Stop for Writers newsletter is updates on what's happening at the site. So if you want to stay on top of the new tools that we're bringing on, or what new thesaurus that we built at that site, then that's a good one to subscribe to as well. So those are both, you can go to writershelpingwriters.net, and right in the sidebar, you'll see like a newsletter for both of those. For stalking me online, definitely Twitter is where I share the most links to really good articles and stuff like that. And I have 2 different accounts. Angela Ackerman is my main one. And I have One Stop for Writers with a 4 instead of FOR. And I share different stuff on both. But again, they're really, really good articles. I know that there's so much information out there, and people kind of, they need help with deep point of view. Where do I go? You know, I try to find the really best articles to kind of help narrow and save people time, because I realize you can get lost. It can be like a rabbit hole, the internet, trying to find articles on something. So I try to do some of that legwork for people. So Twitter is good for chit chat and just fun. Follow me on Facebook. I love Facebook. I know a lot of people are kind of down on it. I try to ignore all the political stuff. I don't get political. You know, I try to keep it upbeat, and I like interacting with people. So that's another good place to find me for sure.
Excellent. We'll drop all those links below the video so that people can find all of those bits and pieces easily. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your very packed schedule to talk to us and share the resources, and for creating so many really fabulous resources for all of us to use. I can personally say they have changed my writing for sure,
Oh,
and
wow.
changed my process, which has just been fantastic. And I'll testimonial anytime you need one.
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to provide it. And for all of you out there just discovering the tools, you're in for a world of fun. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be in touch, and be sure to check out the other interview with Angela. We've been dropping comments about One Stop for Writers, and we are going to do a whole separate interview on that. So be sure to check that out as well if that has piqued your curiosity. There's some really cool stuff in there that you'll want to hear about. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being a part of this Creative Academy event. If you're not a member yet, join us today and unlock a wealth of resources, masterclasses, feedback opportunities, and online community events designed to help you reach the next step in your writing journey. No matter what stage you're at, we've got a helping hand to guide you along the way. Check out our free resource room if you'd like to get a taste of how we can help you reach your writing and publishing goals. Thank you for bringing us along on your writing and publishing journey, and Donna, Eileen, and I hope we'll see you around the Creative Academy soon.